Brett Rice, Core Vision Financial Group, coming to you today with another episode in our continuing series on financial topics. Today I'm going to be joined by Steve Herendeen. He's a regional director for Precoa. They're a funeral pre-planning company that works in that space of funerals and helping people plan for funerals and all of that stuff. And today he's going to be talking about the pre-planning process. How does that conversation get started? Where does it get started? Kind of that thing. Where should we be? Who should be doing it? All of those things right there. So again, we thank you guys for joining us today. Please go to our YouTube page and subscribe so you're notified when we post a new video. And I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for spending your time with us. Hey Steve, could you give us an intro, a biography of who Steve Herendeen is and what he does?
Yeah, well, actually, in August last month, I completed 40 years of what I do, and I started out working for a funeral home cemetery operation in 1983. I was the general manager, sales manager of that operation for 22 years, and then the owner unfortunately had an accident, and his boys ended up selling that operation. They had a new owner. At that point in time, I just didn't feel that new owner was for me. And so at that point in time, I don't want to say I was really looking, but we used to work with Lincoln Heritage Funeral Planning. And I talked to Monica every day, and she said, "What do you think of your new owners?" I said, "I really don't." I said, "After 22 years, I might be doing something different." So she said that there's some people getting ready to start a new pre-need company. And it was LHFP, Lincoln Heritage Funeral Planning. And so I started that in 2005. And so I'm still doing that, just completed 18 years in that. So 18 and 22, 40 years. But so I have a lot of experience managing, if you will, the funeral home. Funeral directors in our situation worked for me. And then I manage a group of people that sell pre-plan, which now I have about 40, I'll say, advanced funeral planners with about 30 funeral homes that I'm kind of a consultant to. And if they want to ask me about embalming fluid and different aspects of the business, I can talk shop with them. And if they need an advanced funeral planner to help them sell pre-need to grow their market share, that's probably more what I specialize in.
Okay, thank you very much for that background. Having had the conversation with Brent, and I've met you a couple of times, so I wasn't exactly sure what you did as far as in the pre-planning services, so that's good to know. Thank you very much and 40 years is a lot of experience.
Yeah, sometimes I just came back from Lafayette actually last night, and I did a couple of, we do those lunch and learn programs, and I always kind of tell people a little bit of my background, how I got started. And when I say 40 years, I almost have to pinch myself, think, boy, that's a long time.
That's a lot of experience, yes. All right, so let's talk about pre-planning funeral expenses and where somebody gets started at on that.
Well, how would they get started on pre-planning?
Yes, sir.
It's interesting. A lot of times, when I do programs, I'll ask people if they ever thought about it before. And a few people, have, and then I ask them, I say, just out of curiosity, what made you start thinking about it? And it's a lot of times some people, kid and say, well, we're not getting any younger. But a lot of times it's actually maybe a family member or friend passed away suddenly, and they went to their funeral, and it kind of caught them off guard, and they thought, you know what, boy, that could have been us. And I think through that conversation or that thinking process, they thought, boy, maybe we ought to get something squared away. We don't want our kids to be faced with that like our friends or other family members were. And so I think that's maybe the initial thought. But as far as what we do some marketing. We send out surveys to families, and they fill those surveys out, requesting information, if you will. We do the lunch and learn programs. Again, it's all about education. And so we do a lot of programs to educate people, because I found out a long time ago when I started, my first sales manager told me that, Stevie goes, everybody needs this. They just don't know it yet. And there's that little saying is so true. It's so important. And once you can sit down with people and educate them, the benefits financially and emotionally, it's almost like, why would you not want to do it? But they just don't know how it works. There's no books on it. There's no brochures on it. And unfortunately, the only way that we find out about it is when we have to go through it.
Yeah, I think anybody that's gone through it says, man, I wonder if this is really what the wishes were, right? Do you really know if that's what they wanted? So I think having the opportunity for you to kind of give a list of what your wishes are, I think long term could help the people that kind of have to take care of this on the other side, to get that set up.
There's really two, I think, points of interest for people in general. Is one is an emotional benefit, then there's obviously a financial benefit. But the emotional benefit, I've always told people through the years, I said, listen, how much is it worth to you that if something were to happen to you that your spouse would not have to deal with this at this point in time? How much is that worth? And it's hard for people to, you can't, how can you put a value on such a thing? And so that's really what we focus on. So I always tell people, I say, listen, there are some financial benefits for sure for doing this, but I'm going to tell you not to do it for the money. I'm going to tell you do it for the emotion, because you just cannot value the importance of, like you said, knowing what somebody wanted and being able to follow through with their wishes. This makes you feel good, and there's leaves
Yeah.
no doubt in your mind.
Yeah, I think, the family's going to have enough going on as it is. The last thing that they probably want to be focused on is those details of, the burial, the funeral, and that stuff.
Right. And I always show a slide. One of my questions during a program is, how many decisions do you think there are when you're making funeral arrangements? And it's interesting. People kind of hesitate a little bit. And if I actually had them try to take a paper and write it down, they could maybe come up with 12. I don't know, maybe 15 would be pushing it. But I show them a slide of 100, and
Wow.
they just stare at that for a little while, because they're just at it all to think that there's almost 100 decisions that people have to come up with when they're making funeral arrangements. And not only is there a lot of decisions, what's interesting is the time frame, because it's usually within 24 to 36 hours. So that's a lot of things to get right within a short period of time. And that, I always tell them, that slide in itself illustrates the importance of having some of this done beforehand, because there's no repeats. We can't go, oh, sorry about that. We messed up. We need to go back and we will redo that. Once you're done, we're done.
Yeah, in that moment, they've got to make a financial decision about how much money to spend on all of this stuff. And it's like, that's like the last thing you probably want your family focused on.
Yeah, the finances can get tricky because, again, your emotions. I always tell people, if you plan beforehand with me, I said, you're going to save maybe 50, close to 50%. I said, what do you think that is? And people, again, not sure what the answer is. I say, well, it's emotions. I'm not going to tell you honestly that one casket is better than the other. They all serve the same purpose. A burial vault is what the casket goes inside of that prevents the ground from caving in. There are vaults and caskets that range in prices, but I'm not going to tell you really that one's better than the other. I'm going to educate you. Hey, there's some caskets made out of wood. There's some that are bronze. There's some that are copper. There's some are steel. Some are stainless steel. They all do the same thing for us. But now I'm going to share with you with knowledge of what they are and how they work. And then with that knowledge, you tell me which is best for you. And so on a pre-need basis, they can think through that process. When someone's passed away, interesting statistic, 80% of the time when someone passes away, it's unexpected. So that means they didn't even see it coming. So when I'm talking to people and in at-need situations, they're still in shock of that news that someone actually passed away. They're listening, but they're not really hearing what I have to say. And then when it comes to prices, they're just wanting to do the best they feel for that family. And a lot of times they think the best is spending more money, which is not obviously the case.
Yeah, like you were talking about being in that emotional situation, you could get to some overspending pretty quick because you're like, oh, I want to do the best for this person. I want them to have the best of the best, and they want all of this stuff. But if the deceased has done any planning, you already know their wishes.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. And like I said, and it makes people feel good. When people don't have anything, I've got to start meetings that, listen, offer my condolences. Sorry for your loss. Today, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. but we'll walk through it. They're not going to be right or wrong. We're going to do the best we can and we'll be okay. On the other side, if they've already pre-planned, I pull out a folder and I'll say, I don't know if you were aware of this, but your mom and dad planned 10 years ago with this person, and they've got everything all outlined, what they wanted and how they want things done. And the people again are just kind of stare. Are you kidding me? No, it's all taken care of. But what do we have to do today? Well, we got to do two things. You got to tell me what day you want the funeral and what time you want it to start. No kidding. I said, that's it. So it makes it pretty easy.
Yeah, that would be, I think, a huge lift off the shoulders of the people who are there to decide those things. I'm going to ask because I don't know. I mean, in general, you would start with, going to a funeral home and, opening up a discussion about pre-planning funeral expenses.
Yeah, a lot of times if someone comes in or they've called in, they've something that's been on their mind. A lot of times it could be family member obviously not doing well health-wise, and they're maybe getting close to where they're going to pass away. So they've come in to kind of figure out what the options are, how it works, and get some of their things done beforehand. When they do that, the first thing that we do is get statistical information: names, birth dates, date of marriage, social security numbers, parents' names, mom's maiden name. We need all that information. Some of it goes on the death certificate, helps us just move things forward. So there's a kind of a fact sheet, if you will, a statistical sheet that we gather all this information on. And then once we go through that, and then we have a diagram of an outline. You've got really boils down the two categories from there. You've got merchandise, which is your burial space, your burial vault, memorialization, which is the marker, opening and closing of the grave, and then your casket/urn. And those are your merchandise items. Then on the other side is your service items, and services would be services within the funeral home. Do you want a traditional burial where you want to have visitation and viewing, or do you want to have, you looking more towards cremation? And then if they're cremation, we share with them that we've got three options for them there. You can have direct cremation. A lot of people don't realize cremation as a word, that's just the final disposition of the body. That doesn't tell me really. I'll ask people, they'll say, hey, remember, I want to be cremated. And they think if they share that word with me that I know exactly what they want. But cremation, that's just the final disposition of the body. That means when it's all said and done, the body's going to be cremated. A lot of times I'll ask people, well, what are we going to do to put your family on a path of healing? And they don't know what I really meant by that. So for example, direct cremation, that's where someone passes away, we pick them up. There's always necessary preparations that we have to do, mostly body cleansing, things like that. And then we take it to the crematory. Then the body's cremated, the cremated remains come back to us, and then we present them to the family, and then we're all done. But option number two, you've got cremation with a memorial service. So that means the body's not present, but family members can still come, offer condolences, and pay their respects. There's usually a picture or perhaps an urn representing the person there, but the body itself is not present. And then option number three, you can actually have a visitation and a viewing, and then with cremation to follow. And sometimes there's healing of just seeing the person. Because going back to that statistic, when I shared that 80% of the time when someone passes away, it's unexpected. So you get that news. If mom, for example, is down in Florida wintering down there, and you get the news mom passed away, it's not that you don't believe the person shared the news, but sometimes there's an old saying, seeing is believing. You almost have to see it to kind of register it in your mind, if you will. So sometimes with cremation, it's nice to have a visitation or viewing where the family can see the person and then the body's cremated afterwards. And again, there's not a right or a wrong way. It's just we just have options and choices, and it's whichever works obviously best for the family.
Yeah, and you're talking about a couple situations. I never even thought about that. Somebody passes away in another state and you haven't seen them for a minute. The option of having the body present prior to cremation could give a lot of people closure on something like that. So I had never even thought about that. But pre-planning and everyone already knowing that that's your wish, or the ability to choose that, I think that that's got to give some closure and options for the family that they could choose that would help with that.
There's still families today that really don't know those options I just shared with you there. A lot of times when people mention the word cremation, our mind just goes one thing, simple cremation. We pass away, you call the funeral home, they pick us up, bring us our care, and we do those necessary preparations. And then we take you to the crematory, you're cremated, brought back, and then we present the cremated remains to the family. They think that's what cremation. They don't realize sometimes you can have a memorial service or a viewing and then cremation to follow. And that's one of the benefits again for pre-planning, because we have an opportunity to share those opportunities for the family. And it's interesting. Some people, I always tell them this little saying that our death doesn't belong to us. More importantly, it belongs to the people who loved you and shared life with you, because those are the ones that have to go on. And some people, they're not trying to be mean or anything like that, but they're thinking in their mind, like my dad, he always told me, hey, you're the oldest. This is what I want you to do. If something happens to me, I want you to cremate me and I want you to bury me in the backyard. And I said, well, you tell my other brothers that? He goes, no, you're the oldest. You take care of it. And I always thought, boy, if something happened to him, I got to tell my brothers he wanted us to bury him in the backyard. I didn't know if they think I'm crazy or
Right.
what. But I tell people that my dad wasn't a mean person. I think he was just thinking, listen, if you cremate me and bury me in the backyard, it's not going to get any simpler than that for you. But I tell people my dad probably never saw the phrase that your death doesn't belong to you. More importantly, it belongs to those people who loved you and shared life with you. And when you can share that thought with people, and then I ask people, do you have any grandkids, for example? And if they say, well, yeah, let me ask you this question. If something happened to one of those grandkids, would you cremate them? You know what their answer is pretty fast? Oh, no, we wouldn't do that. And I
Nope.
said, well, you know what? That's what you're asking them to do to you. And I would never thought about it that way. So when you get a chance to plan, so you can think through all these kind of scenarios and options, and it gives you more time to consider what really might be best for your family versus when you don't have anything. If someone in passing said, hey, like my dad, hey, cremate me, and then you feel, well, gosh, I got to cremate him. That's not really what I wanted to do, or I'd like to do this along with it. But you almost feel guilty because you're not following through with what the person told you they wanted. So again, that planning process is so important if you get a chance to do it beforehand.
So yeah, I think right there you're touching on why it's important for the pre-planning process to have taken place is to, make sure your wishes are known, and at the same time you have having a conversation with a professional that has, educated you on all of your options out there. And then you can decide from that, and then ultimately the ones that love you will know what your request was at that point. So, kind of in closing and wrapping up here, is there anything else you want to talk about or points that you haven't touched on yet that you think are important that we should make sure we talk about?
Well, I think so I always tell people you can plan your funerals. You don't have to fund them, but you can also obviously plan your funerals and you can choose to fund them. And there are some very important parts of the funding option, if you will. So again, we use what we call a funeral policy to fund families' funerals. And the benefit of that is that you can lock in that cost, that today's cost, for example. So however someone's thinking about doing it, if it comes to a total of $6,000, you use a number, that's the amount of the funeral policy that they take out, exactly $6,000, not a penny more, not a penny less, because we can then guarantee that price. The prices that are guaranteed are prices that come from the funeral home. So their services, the caskets, the burial vaults, anything that we provide, we can guarantee within that funeral policy. Now, as an option, we can include opening and closing of a cemetery grave. They can put death certificates, some different things like that in there. But those are called non-guaranteed items because they're third-party charges that we can't control. A policy is divided between guaranteed items and non-guaranteed items. But if you decide to fund it, those guaranteed items are guaranteed. And the other thing of importance is that this policy is irrevocable. And it starts to move forward with the concept, what they call Medicaid spend down. And I always tell people, I wish they would teach this in school. It's really that important. But a lot of people never run into it, never heard of it until they're right in the midst of doing it. But Medicaid spend down is where a family member, maybe unfortunately, has to go to a nursing home. And nursing homes today are $10,000 to $12,000 a month, roughly, from expenditure. I always tell people we're fortunate during our working life. If we save some money, start writing a check for $10,000 a month, it goes by pretty quick. So what happens if we run out of money? Well, they're not going to kick us out of the nursing home, but what they'll do is they'll help us to qualify for Medicaid. And how we do that in the state of Indiana, you have to have less than $1,500 of accountable assets. And then you can qualify for Medicaid, which then they continue to cover your stay and your care that you would have at the nursing home. Now, the importance of sharing that with people is that this funeral policy is irrevocable. So if you go to a nursing home and you've got this funeral policy, that means they can't take it away from you. They can't force your family to cash it in. It's irrevocably been assigned to the funeral home to carry out your wishes at the time something were to happen. And so it's a very important part of that puzzle, because life insurance, I have it, there's nothing wrong with it. But I tell people it's revocable, not irrevocable. So if they're doing an asset check in a nursing home, if that policy is worth more than $1,500, they can actually force you to cash it in or take it away from you, because it's revocable, not irrevocable. And so I have a lot of people that maybe had a life insurance that they were planning on using to pay for their funeral, and that then they get to a nursing home and then they had to do the Medicaid spend down, and it was taken away from them. And people don't realize, that can happen. So you can plan your funeral, you don't have to fund it, or you can plan your funeral and you can choose to fund it. And there are some big benefits as far as guaranteeing some prices, the fact that it can be irrevocable, protect you against Medicaid spend down, and those type of things as we move into the future as we age.
Well, those are some very great points. I really appreciate you taking the time today, Steve, to talk to us and educate us on this. As like we had in a previous discussion, I've not gone through the pre-planning funeral expenses yet, so I felt like this conversation was going to be a great way for me to get educated on it. So thanks again for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.